1940 to 1957, a man known as the Mad Bomber terrorized New York City. He set off 32 bombs in public places, often in movie theaters. For years, the New York City Police Department couldn't solve the case, so they asked a psychiatrist to assemble a psychological profile of the unknown bomber.
The first offender profile was by James Bressel in the Mad Bomber case. If there were others before him, no one who's looked has been able to find it yet.
Dr. Bressel's revolutionary tool helped the FBI create a new method, criminal profiling, that changed American criminology forever.
The first bomb was in a Con Edison plant on the far west side. A Con Ed worker found a bomb in a wooden box on a windowsill on his lunch hour. And in that box was a note. Con Ed crooks, this was for you.
The notes kept coming. The bomber sent threatening letters to the police, newspapers, and to Con Edison, each signed with the initials FP. Then, 11 years after the first bomb was found, another exploded in Grand Central Terminal. Moments later, a phone rang in the Grand Central Oyster Bar. Was there much damage? A man asked. His voice had a slight foreign accent. After the Grand Central explosion, more bombs went off in quick succession.
He would sit in the orchestra. When the lights came down, he would take out a cheap penknife and he would rip open the upholstery of an adjacent seat and place his homemade bomb into the upholstery. There is one supposedly in the Empire State Building that has never been found. At its worst, it was similar to 9/11. People were scared to ride the subways, scared to go into department stores. It was as if his madness was contagious. In one case, a woman turned her husband into the police.
Over 16 years, more than 30 bombs had either exploded or been discovered undetonated, and the NYPD was no closer to finding the culprit.
The police were essentially conducting their work as they had 100 years earlier, roughing up suspects, leaning on informants, and beating the bushes.
In many ways, the approach to physical evidence was pre-scientific. This was pre-DNA, pre-trace fiber analysis. Most of the people working in crime labs were former police officers. They weren't scientists.
As the investigation dragged on, one team bore the brunt of the dangerous work, the New York City Bomb Squad. 10 detectives, led by Captain Howard Finney, patrolled the city's public spaces and defused live bombs. With the police's current methods failing, Finney decided to look for an alternative strategy.
In desperation, the head of the bomb squad decided to show all of the evidence to a psychiatrist in hopes that he might be able to shed some light on what the bomber's motivations were. James Bressel was just about as crazy as the bomber was. Like Sherlock Holmes, he was a drug addict. He was extremely eccentric. He obsessively wrote crossword puzzles with grids that he obsessively drew himself.
Dr. Bressel had worked primarily in public hospital settings. Some of his work focused specifically on people who were both criminals and mentally ill. So that gave him contact with people who'd committed crimes in a way that not all psychiatrists had. In the 1940s, the homicide detectives had little use for psychiatry. They thought they knew what mattered about criminal behavior. They didn't think psychiatrists had much to offer.
Coincidentally, Dr. Bressel had followed the Mad Bomber case from the beginning and had a plan to create a radical new method that would help to catch him.
Howard Finney came to Dr. Bressel's office with satchels of evidence. Dr. Bressel examined this evidence. After about 2 hours, he turned to Detective Finney and he said, "The man that you're looking for lives in a northern suburb of the city. He's never had a girlfriend. He has a history of workplace disputes. He comes from a Slavic background. He's somewhat impoverished." And the last thing he said was, "When you catch him, he'll be wearing a double-breasted suit, and it will definitely be buttoned."
The reason he got that profile correct had to do with his being presented evidence that contained usable clues, his psychiatric insight into what some of those clues might mean, his inference that the killer would be of Slavic origin was based on his knowledge that bombing was favored in Middle Europe. The use of stabbing was frequent in Middle Europe. The use of both together implied this person would have been influenced by their ancestors.
When Dr. Brussel analyzed FP's letters, he recognized persistent and logically constructed delusions. He saw that FP believed forces were controlling him and plotting against him. These characteristics were consistent with paranoid schizophrenia.
He was correct that the bomber would be neat and properly dressed, and that he inferred from the meticulousness of the bomb construction. People who are paranoid and see themselves as flawless want others to see them that way, so they follow the rules, they do precisely what's expected, and they think others should do so too.
Dr. Brussel told Captain Finney to publish the criminal profile in the newspaper. If FP was the self-righteous paranoid that Brussel believed him to be, he wouldn't be able to resist an opportunity to set the record straight.
A letter was published in the New York Journal American, and lo and behold, the bomber wrote back. And with each letter, the newspaper would learn a little bit more about the bomber, information that they, of course, would share with the police. By triangulating this information, they were able to look for a file in the Con Ed records of disgruntled former employees. They eventually closed in on the file of an employee living in Waterbury, Connecticut. The police knocked on the door at midnight, and a middle-aged man came to the door. He fit Dr. Brussel's description pretty much exactly. When the detective said, "Go get dressed, you're coming downtown with us," sure enough, he came out of his bedroom with a double-breasted jacket, and it was buttoned. He turned out to be a man from a Lithuanian background named George Mateski. He was, in fact, the bomber.
His motive was revenge against the Consolidated Edison Company for a 1931 plant accident he believed gave him tuberculosis. Now he faces sanity tests and trial. His campaign ended.
The bomber believed that he was on a moral crusade to right a wrong that had been done to him by the powerful forces in America that he believed were conspiring against him. He believed that he was a kind of God and that he was guiding the world in the right way. Well, if you're going to guide the world in the right way, you better be dressed right for that. We have all grown up with this idea of thinking that you are either insane or you're sane. What profilers would tell you is that it's not really like that. We're all a little bit insane, and we are all on a spectrum of insanity.
Those who began doing what became known as profiling, in their effort to find anyone who'd done this before, stumbled on Brussel's book. He anticipated the field. The pioneers who started to form a systematic approach to profiling, John Douglas, Bob Ressler, every time they were out somewhere training, they'd stick around an extra day to interview some criminals that the warden would let them in to see.
These profilers conducted interviews with some of the most notorious violent criminals in American history, including Ted Bundy, John Wayne Gacy, James Earl Ray, David Berkowitz, and Charles Manson.
For many offenders who've already been convicted, they're happy to talk about this. And of course, when those very agents told Tom Harris, he wrote Silence of the Lambs, inventing Clarice Starling, the young agent who would go out and interview an offender. I think eventually there will be major technological advances, but I think it's always going to be important that people who know about psychopathology, about human nature and human behavior be at the helm of this.
Can science grasp the mind of a serial killer, or does it take something more than that? Dr. Brussel's genius was that he could see that it did require science, but it required something else. It required intuition, something mysterious.